So here's the directory structure for a fresh install of Laravel 4.2. And at this point, this should look pretty familiar to all of us. So we have our app directory, and within it, a place for config and controllers and models, and a start directory, so you can place stuff within global.php if you need to. You have a place to create your tests, and then you have your filters.php file. So pretty familiar stuff, right? Now, let's take a look at the default structure for Laravel 4.3. First, though, I need to pull it in. And right now, because it's still not officially released, I'm going to pull it in using Composer, create project. I want Laravel/Laravel. We will create a directory called Laravel 4.3, and I specifically want the dev develop branch. And give that just a moment to pull in. Okay, so that one is pulled in. Let's take a look. Back in PHP Storm, let me toggle this, and I'm going to put these side by side. So 4.2 is on the left, 4.3 is on the right. So immediately we can see some differences. Notice that things like the config directory and database and storage and tests, all of those have been pulled out of the app directory and placed within the project root. So that begs the question, if we've ripped so much of this stuff out, what exactly is in the app directory? Well, let's take a look. I think you'll like it. It's a lot cleaner and a lot more indicative of what the app directory actually is. It's your application. So it's not really appropriate to put your tests or your storage or your configuration within this directory. Instead, notice that we have entry points into our app. So HTTP is an entry point into your application. And the same is true with the console. And by the way, notice that the commands directory has now been renamed to console. And the reason why we do that is because this idea of command-oriented architecture is starting to take hold in the PHP community, so that can be a little confusing if they have the same name. Instead, this is a little more understandable. Your console entry point, your HTTP entry point. So now, as you might expect, anything that is web-specific will be contained within here. So this will include everything from your routes file to your controllers. But also notice, if we take a look at the home controller, it's been namespaced. And don't worry, if this is something you don't like the idea of, Taylor has thought about this a lot and has added the necessary tweaks to still make it very, very easy to, for example, route to a controller without always having to specify the full namespaced path to the controller. Next, what about filters.php? Well, now that's been replaced with all of these various files. So rather than grouping all of them within filters.php, which is what basically happens right now in 4.2, here's auth, auth basic, guest. Now, if I switch back, and I will go ahead and expand that, you'll see that each one is contained within its own class. And I think that's actually a good improvement there. So that begs the question, if we want to add our own filters, how do we do that? Well, you'll find that Laravel 4.3 is going to emphasize service providers much more than it has in the past. In 4.2, they were sort of an optional thing. If you like the convenience of using a service provider, then you can create your own, but nothing really requires you to. But now in 4.3, we're going to nudge you a little bit more. So notice that you have a new providers directory. So if we take a look, here is the filter service provider. Now, if we scroll down, you can see each one of these filters that we have registered is referenced here. So that means if you have your own custom filter, simply reference it right here, my filter. And the same is going to be true for other files. For example, global.php, that whole start directory, that doesn't exist anymore. Instead, you will use the service providers here. So we have a generic app service provider. We have one for how we handle errors. We have one for logging. We even have one for artisan. So before, you might have gone to artisan.php and done something like artisan add new my command. That's how we do it currently in 4.2. But now in 4.3, you'll reference your commands right here. And on that note, notice that we have this inspire command. This isn't meant to be used at all. It's just an example command to give you a basic idea of how these are built. So if we take a look, PHP artisan inspire, there we go. And of course, you can remove that on your own. However, now you have a simple command where you can get a basic idea of how these things are built. And by the way, feel free to tease Taylor about this as much as you possibly can. All right, so what else? Well, if we've removed the models directory completely, where are you supposed to put that stuff? And the answer is your app directory. And notice that we already have user.php within here. Now, this is new. Take a look at the namespace here. Now, the reason why we're namespacing everything from controllers to console commands to our eloquent models is because now in Laravel 4.3, it's 100% PSR4. And this is actually the first PHP framework to do that, if I'm not mistaken. However, that's great, but it might take you off guard a little bit because maybe you don't want an app directory. Maybe you want the namespace to be the name of your product or the name of your company. In my case, it would be Laracast, but now it looks like it's forcing me to use a namespace of app, and I don't necessarily want that. Well, don't worry, we've already thought about that. If we run PHP Artisan, there's a new command here called app name. First, let's take a look at the help for it. So all we have to do is give it a namespace. So let's try it out. PHP Artisan app name, and I'm going to change it from app to Laracasts. Let's run it. So basically what that did is it filters through all of those files, it updates the namespace, it'll go into the relevant configuration files and update that stuff for you automatically. It's enormously convenient, so make sure that you use this command rather than trying to update all of these files and namespaces manually. But now let's take a look. So we still have the app directory. However, if we look at, for example, controllers, notice that it has updated the namespace accordingly. And the same will be true for user.php. And for that matter, anything within this directory. And remember, the reason why we can keep the directory name as app is because we're using PSR4. So that's another thing that the app name command will do. Notice that it automatically updates this file and changes it from app, which it was before, over to Laracast. So the Laracast namespace is located within the app directory. But even better, if we go into things like config, and let's take a look at auth, if I scroll down, this too has been updated. So Laravel is smart enough to update all of the relevant files in your application. All right, so that's been your tour of the directory changes. However, there's still so much more to cover. For example, what the heck is a request directory? Well, don't worry, we're going to look at all of that in the coming lessons. So I hope you're excited.